So here we are inside, and I have taken off the heart and lungs. They are really closely associated, and I'm doing this by myself, so I've kind of got one hand on the lung here, one hand on my phone. But let's have a closer look at the lungs. So here's the windpipe, or that trachea. So we can actually cut that open. Grab my knife here. I'm doing this left-handed. I should have organised this better. But we can actually cut that open. And you can see those rings of cartilage, those ridges. You can actually see right down there. Now, I don't know if you can see, but it actually branches off into two directions. So we've got two lungs. So this is the trachea. And the two branches will be the bronchi. I don't know if you've heard of bronchitis. It's when you've got an infection in those areas. So I'll turn it around this way. So we've got the lungs on top of the heart. So if we were to follow this trachea down, as far as we could go, we'd actually find a spot where it branches off into a bit of a V. So I'll pause and cut it open, and then I'll resume recording so you can see what it looks like once it's opened. Okay, here we go. So I've cut down the trachea, and this is one lung up here, one lung down here. You can see that here I've now just opened up the bronchi. Two bronchi, one bronchus, and you can see that down here you've got these pipes that lead into further smaller pipes. You've got lots and lots of branching off going off here. So these smaller holes are leading into passageways called bronchioles. So they're kind of a smaller version of the bronchi. And they are going to go right down like a corridor in all these branching directions, right down to the bottom lobe of the lung. So you can see as well that the tissue of the lung is quite spongy. It actually feels quite a lot like, I guess, a balloon filled with like chocolate mousse or something. That's kind of the texture it is. It's quite spongy. It will float if you were to cut some of this off and put it in a beaker of water. It would float because there's lots of little pockets here where these tiny corridors will branch into very, very, very small, tiny little corridors until they end in these little bubbles called alveoli. So the alveoli kind of give it that spongy texture. So I'll pause it again. We'll see if we can cut down into one of these small bronchioles. All right, so I've cut open even further. So we've got trachea, bronchi, got a bronchiole, and then they're going into even smaller, finer divisions. I don't know if you can see down here, it's going down and branching off again. And you've got these really small branching corridors, these bronchioles, going smaller and smaller and smaller, right down to the very depths of the lung. If we flip this over, you can actually see here, the heart is really close to the lungs. I've trimmed this up. It actually had quite a bit of fat on it. This is all a big lump of fat. But the heart actually has got an artery that goes to the lungs, and a vein that takes blood from the lungs back to the heart. So what I'm going to do is trim this up, and I'm actually going to cut the heart off. I'll get rid of the lungs so that we can have a closer look at the heart itself. Okay, so here we go. I've got my heart just by itself. You'll notice that it's tapered, it's pointed at the bottom. It's really muscly, so this is actually just like some really tough meat. And you can see it's got fat along the outside. Up the top, if I lift it up and we look down on it, you can actually see some of these major arteries coming out away from the heart. And these little kind of darkish flap things on the top. Now those are actually, so there's one there, and there's one over there. Those are actually the atria, the two topmost chambers of the heart. It's a little bit hard, but I'll see if I can actually find These are the chambers of the heart that receive blood. So they will have veins leading into them. You can actually, it's kind of hard just with one hand. Sorry, it's gross. Give me a minute. Here we go. Can actually, I've put my finger into a vein going back to the heart, and here you can see where my finger is inside that atrium. It's actually, you can almost see my glove through it. It's very thin walled because it's receiving blood that's at a low pressure, so it doesn't have to be kind of, I guess, reinforced or anything. And believe it or not, with my finger it's really hard to see, but I can actually put my finger right down there. It will go right down into this bottom corner. So we're going to go down from the atrium into this bottom chamber, the ventricle of the heart. So that's what happens on this side. A similar setup is on this side. You have an atrium here, which doesn't look like much. This bit where I'm rubbing my thumb over. And then it will lead into a ventricle down the bottom. So what I'm going to do is see if I can open up maybe the heart down the side, and we can get an opened up view of the atrium down into one of these ventricles. Success. All right, so I've cut down the side of the heart, and you can see that the top chamber, the atrium, is up here. So it's quite thin walled. It's not very big. And then down here you can see these strings. And then here we're just over my finger, that is like a valve. So these are your literal heartstrings that hold your valve in place and help the blood only flow in one direction. So blood comes into the top of the heart, flows down into this ventricle chamber, this bottom chamber. It's really easy to remember because it's like a V shape, V for ventricle. And yeah, so we've got these valves that are holding the, strings that are holding the valves, making sure there's only a one-way flow of blood into the heart. The blood will come down here, and then it will actually go, I've cut this one a bit wrong, I might cut the other side. It will come into the heart this way, come down to the bottom, and then it will get squeezed. And I don't know if you can see up here, it would actually flow out the other side. So it does a bit of the blood does a bit of a U-turn in the bottom here, and it will go out of an artery that's a different pathway. So it comes in with a vein, goes down, comes out with an artery. You can see that the ventricles are really thick and muscly. Heart is like a muscle that meat that you might feed like cats and dogs and stuff because it's pretty meaty. One side of the heart is going to have thicker ventricles than the other, because one side of the heart is going to pump blood right to all of your body, your limbs, and the other side of your heart, the ventricle is only going to pump blood to the lungs, which are right next door. So you can tell what side of the heart you're looking at depending on the thickness of the ventricle. So I'll see if I can show you. Here you can see the artery that's going to come out there. So the blood goes in one side down, does a U-turn, and comes out another passage, another blood vessel. You can see the same on the top here. We've got one way into the top chamber, down to the ventricle, and then another vessel that's going to take blood out. So you can actually, if you've got long fingers, you can actually get your finger to go down one of these into the heart, and then you turn and move your finger, turn it around and bring it back up the other way. It's kind of fun. So hopefully we can do one of these in class. But I mean, if we can't, or if you want to watch it again, or if you kind of butchered your one a little bit, that's kind of the things you're supposed to see. So I've done one final cut on the other side. So here is the vein that brings blood back into the atrium. So this darker part is the atrium. Comes down into the ventricle here. So if I open it up, you can see that this side of the heart is not as thick. The ventricle wall is not as thick, so this would be the side that pumps blood to the lungs, because it doesn't need to have so much oomph or so much of a push. The blood will come down into this part of the V. Then it will actually, once it gets squeezed, it'll get squeezed up. The valve here, you can see they're lying flat. That valve is going to close, so it stops blood going back out this way. and it will actually take blood out where my thumb is going. Oh, there it is. Where is it? Out here. So where my thumb is, that would be the artery taking blood away from the heart to the lungs. And here's a nicer look at that thickness of the ventricle there. So yeah, there's your heart dissection. Hope it was fun to watch. It was fun to do, but yeah, if you're a bit squeamish, and you probably haven't watched this video,